Mhm.
Hello, I'm all wrinkled and I'm really excited. I'm excited to have you, Kelly, on the podcast because people listening might not know that you are the genius behind the podcast that makes me, and today you as well, sound wonderful. And so welcome to the other side of the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited.
I genuinely am really, really excited because I know that you don't just do my podcast, you do lots of people's podcasts, lots of people that I admire, and none of them have got you this side of the microphone. And so I feel very smug about getting you to come and have a conversation with me.
Well, firstly, thank you. And how rude of them not to ask me.
Maybe that's it. Maybe that's why I get all of like, people always say, I always feel so safe here and I always share things I never normally share. And I think, there must be something in there. Maybe it's just audacity.
Absolutely.
What is sacrosanct to you and in your life? And before we did this podcast, had you ever heard of the word?
I had heard of the word. I'd never considered it.
Okay.
It's like there's a lot of things that I've learned by editing your podcast. I think sometimes I've messaged you saying, I'm not sure I understood what was being said in that episode, and that's okay. It's okay. Because that's the great thing about it. It helps me learn. So yeah, no, I heard of sacrosanct. I know what it means. I'd never considered what it means to me. So, what is sacrosanct to me is the relationship with my family. It's the most important thing to me. Knowing that we hold each other as a family unit, and that's really important. And then the other thing that's sacrosanct to me is my voice and the power of it. And it's not always been. It's really not always been. It's only been in the last few years that I've realized that my voice holds power. And that's important to share. So those are the big two things for me that are sacrosanct in my life.
And what I love about that is that in this particular instance, I watch you make those things sacrosanct in your life every day with the decisions and the actions and the behavior that you make. And I can't say that of everyone that comes on, because sometimes, they can tell me, yes, of course, I make these things sacrosanct in my life. And I don't know because I can't see behind the scenes. But we have conversations and I see you making choices that really honor your values and that position those things at the top of your priority list.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I don't always get it right. And I don't always do it as much as I would like to. So on that sort of sliding scale, it's not always right at the top, but it is always there. And that just comes from a whole lot of baggage from the past where that's not been possible for many reasons, whether that's been down to constraints from others or just constraints on myself. And I don't want to live like that anymore. I'm in my 40s. I want to do something different now.
What changed? Like, what happened that changed it?
So 10 years ago, I left my now ex-husband. Very abusive situation. And I left feeling humiliated and that nobody could hear what I was truly saying. Like, no one believed me because I'd not said anything about what was happening. I felt that no one believed me because I'd been so good at hiding it. And so I left losing all my possessions, all of my friends I lost, and I had to start again. And for quite a while, that was pretty devastating until it wasn't. And I started to understand myself more. I got therapy, which is always helpful. I remember in one of my sessions, I said, I just feel so humiliated. And she said, it's not your humiliation. You're not the one that needs to hold that. And it really allowed me to let that go and think, yeah, this is a new opportunity for me now. So I think over the last decade, I've obviously got remarried, I've got 2 young children. I left my job, which was a pretty huge thing to do, pretty risky at the time. Started business. I'm still in business 6 years on, which is to be celebrated.
Yes.
And yeah, I think the key was building self-esteem. It was learning that I'm actually a decent person and I have something to offer to the world and to myself.
You absolutely do. And I love hearing you say that. And before we started recording, we did that bit of preamble chat, and you are privy to some information which I think I'm going to share in this episode, which is that this is going to be the second to last, I'm going to say ever, but don't trust that manifesting generator here. The last ever Sacrosanct Life podcast, because I'm going to bring back Adulting with Ebony. And I'm talking about it in this moment because the power, the kind of what I call my tower card moment, and there have been many in my life, but the tower card moment that led to the end of my business and what had evolved into Misfit for Life, and the friendships that came with that had been 10 and 11-year friendships, and and all the rest of it. That's why the podcast stopped and then didn't restart, because I couldn't be her anymore. I had to do something else, and my choice was to choose that everything in life is sacrosanct, including the shit, including the really hard stuff.
Yeah.
And so when I listen to you talk, I also see that for you. It was a choice, right? We can't always see it in the moment. And that piece, people think developing self-esteem and becoming confident, because very rarely people talk about self-esteem. They talk about confidence and what they actually mean self-esteem. But becoming confident, having self-esteem isn't a journey of I don't know how to put it, like, it isn't a journey of empowerment in the moment, right? Like, the actions don't feel like, look at me gaining all this self-esteem. The actions feel like, look at me looking at myself and owning the stuff that I've been hiding.
Yeah.
And that's the part that leads to us having more confidence, having self-esteem, meeting ourselves fully, and going, you know what, I'm giving too much here. Why am I giving too much? I don't really want to be. Oh, I don't value myself. Oh, I'm going to give more because that, and that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And I think part of my journey over the past 2 years, so definitely during the pandemic, was going to train in NLP, and MBIT, and learning so much about myself. Being able to understand, when I feel like this, I feel it in my body in this way. Instead of just having feelings in my body and just almost numbing it out, actually, this indicates something to me. What do I now choose to do with that? And even sometimes having a feeling and knowing, no, that's not real. This is an old pattern.
Well,
I want to do that because it's safe, it's comfortable. I actually don't want to do that anymore, really. And how hard is it to move through that sometimes to get to the other side?
And it helps having people around you who get it, and it helps, having some new language and being able to actually articulate it. And that, for me, also with MBIT is one of those things. And I think, my ego can really easily get in the way. I'm like, I've been doing personal development work, emotional intelligence work, embodiment work, all of this stuff since I was 15. I'm 42. how did I not know things about myself? Right. And that's how, like, I have still got quite a lot of shame around only getting an autism and ADHD diagnosis last year. I'm like, how the fuck did I not see that? How did I not see that about myself? But part of that was like, was that I was shutting out a whole load of feelings and emotions because they were too big for me. And now understanding that I feel emotion differently from some other people has written, and actually going through MBIT and Master Coach twice now, and being in a room of other people and actually explaining how and what I feel as emotions versus them has blown my mind, because they're like, oh yeah, I feel it like this big here, and I'm like, what? I feel it like the whole room is on fire and my skin is hot. And they're like, and they touch me and they're like, wow, it really is. And it's like, some of it is real, not just in my mind, right?
Yeah, and actually, even if it's kind of just in your mind, how real does it feel? And it's still an experience. So, I mean, I had my ADHD diagnosis 2 years ago now. I'm so grateful for it. It explains so much about who I am, how I show up in the world, and how I want to move forward in the future. And I really resonate with what you say about that shame around it, because when you talk about adulting with Ebony, you know, my classic phrase when I was struggling was always, I just feel like I can't adult. I don't understand how other people are doing it. And I had a
But
huge
that's
amount of
the
shame
point,
around that.
is that I look back now and go, how obvious was it? Like,
Yeah,
how obvious was
exactly.
it? Did everyone else know? And that's the bit that really upsets me. And that's the autism, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
the, like, I just don't see stuff that's really obvious. And the things that are really, really complex are really easy to me. And to your point, like, everything and nothing has changed, because all the people in my world are still the same people, because we still attract each other, and we're still, like, nothing has changed, right? Like, I'm still hanging out with great people, I'm still talking and working with misfits, just have new language for it.
Absolutely. And you don't know what you don't know. So I had no idea I had ADHD. I actually just thought there was something wrong with me. Like, I'm just a flawed person. Now I'm like, I'm not flawed at all. I just wasn't using the way I think, the way I feel to my benefit. I was only seeing the things that I was struggling with. And that's why the way, I mean, my life still, there's sort of struggles. I'm not there with it yet. I'm always going to be learning, because I'm so used to using this neurodiverse brain in a way that doesn't help me.
Yeah.
So shifting that round takes time, obviously. But now I know that I can talk to my husband about it, and I can be really honest about when I'm having a bad day and what I need from him. And he can do the same with me. So one of us is happy to pick up anything that the other is struggling with that day, and it's safe. So for me, within my diagnosis, there's been a safety, because I can put the words to it. And if I don't know, I can talk to someone that I do know that can go, oh, it's that. Or have you read this article? That might explain that for you.
I love that. And I love that because I can't tell yet, still in the experiment stage for me. And I will continue to experiment and share my experiments for my whole life. That's how I'm built.
Yeah.
And motorized throat. I will just share these things, right? And it will continue to be an experiment. But there's definitely deeper intimacy in my life because I am more willing to trust people. And I'm more willing to trust them because I'm also more willing to allow myself to not know stuff and to ask questions. Whereas before I would make assumptions. I had no idea how many assumptions a day I made.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know about you, but for me, when I make those assumptions, I get myself into a right pickle sometimes.
I pride myself in having managed my RSD to such an extent that I'm good. Until I'm assuming that you're cheating on me, not showing up, ignoring me, hate me, bored of me.
You know, and I completely feel that. I mind read constantly. And actually, sometimes you just have to ask people how they're feeling or say, oh, I'm thinking this. I'm being a bit paranoid today. It's a big one for me. I get paranoid that people don't like me for no reason at all, other than something that's in the back of my mind that I'm telling myself. But that links completely back to self-esteem.
It does link back to self-esteem. And the other part, which I feel awkward, uncomfortable, but I'm going to say it anyway, is that I've realized that a lot of my assumptions about other people are projections.
Of course.
So I'm like, maybe they're bored of me. No, Ebony, you're bored of them. Are you willing to say that? No, I'm not. So I will make them be bored of me instead. And so noticing the different ways that I dopamine mine in friendship, in relationship, in all of those, for me, a lot of them are not typical. They're very, very subtle behaviors. And that has been a new layer of adulting and a new layer of discomfort and like meeting myself and bravery and courage to communicate.
Yeah. And, you know, like you say, it's all about communication. And I think that's one thing my husband and I do really well. Not all the time, but most of the time. And we work really hard on it because if we don't, it all falls apart. But I think that's why I love podcasting, because to show up as yourself on a podcast is courageous. You know, it's gutsy. People don't realize that. You know, some people, they rock up and they think, oh, it's easy. But actually, if you are showing up and being open, honest, and sharing what you truly believe, it's a courageous act. And the power of you doing that in that way, you know, I'm so lucky for the people that I edit podcasts for. Like, as I say, I don't always understand what people are talking about, but um, but it comes from a place of real integrity and truly sharing who they are and what they believe. And that's how you draw people to you. That's how you get people to listen to you. That's how you become a leader. And that's why I love the power of people's voices.
I believe that there is a link between the kinds of podcasts that we're talking about here, because there are all sorts of podcasts in the world.
Absolutely.
But the kinds of podcasts we're talking about here, I think there's a link between podcasting and self-esteem. And I think that there's an assumption that the people who are hosting these podcasts are super confident and have great self-esteem. And I don't think that the majority of people understand that it is an exercise in courage and in self-esteem to show up. And I get a lot of requests for solos. Please just talk on your own. Please, you know, share me your wisdom. I could listen to you all day, which is lovely. Don't get me wrong. I can't do it. I can, but nowhere near as easily. It's not fun for me. It doesn't happen. And so I also think that one of the greatest tips for podcasting or any marketing, right, is do the stuff that lights you up and that can be fun, right? And it can be scary and fun at the same time. And it is a lot less scary for me to say uncomfortable things or to tell the truth or to drop into the channel where it is just my voice talking, when I've got really great guests that I genuinely want to hear what they've got to say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is the key to when you're deciding to do a podcast. I mean, the amount of people I speak to about starting podcasts, and everybody has a neurosis about starting a podcast, whether it's the sound of their voice or I don't have the content or people think I don't know what I'm talking about. There's so many. No one is starting a podcast thinking they are the bee's knees at podcasting, nobody is. Because it's growth and learning. And I was talking to someone else the other night who said they don't want to do solos either because they feel better and more confident when they're talking to someone else. And it's like, well, you absolutely need to do what makes you be the best at what you're doing. Because otherwise, you're just not going to show up for it. You're not going to want to do it. And then you'll stop. And I want people to be able to show up in whatever way they can and do what they love and talk about what they love. And, I remember years ago when I was at work, someone said to me, "Oh, you're so confident." And I just like inside, I felt like I was dying. I was like, "Oh, they don't know me." And I said, "Oh, I'm not confident. I'm just a bag of anxiety." And it comes out in that way. It's nervousness. But actually, in when you start doing things like podcasting or whatever it is you're doing, I think there is a quiet confidence that grows the more you do it. You build that muscle, don't you?
Well, confidence is situational and it comes from competency. And if we've not done something, then we can't be confident at it.
Exactly.
Other than if we've never done, like, I was very confident as a child because I didn't know that there were ways that you could get stuff wrong, right? So competency is either confidence is either that you're just natural at it and you haven't got a what if going on, or you've learned through competency, like how to do something and how to show up. And I think that really applies to all of the things, whether it is I want to have a successful business, whether it is I want to get my message out there, whether it's I want to have more connection and intimacy and real relationships and feel seen, heard and understood. There's a level where you may not be a natural at it to start with, and you get to find competency by practicing.
Yeah. And I think for me with podcasting, what an amazing journey for your audience to go on with you. They get to hear you maybe change things up, become more confident at speaking, realize, actually, I want to share this message instead, or, I want to change things up a bit and do more solos or whatever it is people want to do. And I love that journey. I love hearing it. People, I think you have to come to whatever it is you're doing perfect in the first instance. I love seeing people grow.
Yeah, and a lot of people have so much, particularly generators and manifesting generators, have so much conditioning around particularly manifesting generators. I've said I'm going to do it like this, so I have to. And generators of this, like, I want to get it right and I need to master it and therefore I need to have got it. But you have this sacral, and the sacral learns through repetition. And so you have to do it the more you do it, the easier it becomes. And as long as you're doing something that is exciting, it's going to come from that place. And I think for other types, maybe projectors, it's a really great way to be interviewed or to do solos, right? Like projectors love doing solos because not all of them, but it's an opportunity like to respond to like be invited to speak on your own show. Like how, and so I think there is an element of bringing in all of this, like the human design, the operating system, working with your unique operating style and operating system to create something that will attract the exact right people and repel the exact right people.
Absolutely. And like I'm sat here nodding away for those people that aren't looking at us. I'm like, yeah, nodding as if I know anything about human design.
You've learned so much through listening to
yeah, like, I understand a bit, but I'm nodding away as if like, yes, you're so right. I would have no idea. But I think what it speaks to is that when we were talking earlier about the diagnosis that we both had, the more you understand about yourself, the more you can show up in a way that fits who you are. And that's what I'm starting to understand, shall I say, about human design. It gives you more information to be able to show up in the world as who you truly are, rather than wondering why you act in a certain way and maybe resist it or, whatever it is. It's all about what information can I get about myself and how can I use that to benefit me and people around me? And that's why I'm curious about the work you do with human design.
And for me, I'm mentioning it because I can feel so much of what I've been talking about the last few episodes has been to do with neurodiversity. And what's underneath there's a contraction that happens when I do that. And that's not that I don't want to share, I do. But I don't want to just like, it's been misfits for 11 years, right? And it will continue to be misfits. And that might be neurodiversity, and it might be people who are diagnosed or undiagnosed, but it might also be, I have a lot of reflectors in human design in my world, and they're like 1% of the population, or manifestors 8% of the population, because they also feel like a misfit because their operating system doesn't fit with the norm. And it could be all sorts of things. And I think people have this real fear of being themselves because the generation that we grew up in was like, you all have to be the same, you have to be rubber stamped.
Yeah, don't forget to be a good girl.
And I'm curious about the people who you edit podcasts for. Are the ones that people listen to the most and get the most listens, are they the ones that are more like just like everyone else, very generic? Or are they the ones that are really niche and unique and that people are talking about stuff that's personal to them?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think there's a mixture. So I think the ones I do that are very, I'm going to say business focused, they have a very clear aim, and they have set it up in such a way to get that growth, are sort of one set of podcasts that get quite a lot of downloads. And then there's not the other end, but the other type. And they tend to be more wellness podcasts, or I don't know what, spiritual, have very different, interesting people on them, like yours.
What are you saying? That mine isn't business focused and strategic?
Sorry, Ebony, I take it back. It's so business focused and strategic. No, but it's dig myself out of a hole.
We'll lose the point. Come back.
Yeah. There's going to be a little rider at the start of this in the intro. Unfortunately, Kelly no longer edits Ebony's podcast. But I think it's a whole different vibe that's going on for the more spiritual well-being podcasts. So I think the people who really embrace who they are and want to bring to people interviews with people who you would maybe never normally come across. So like the people on your podcast, I've never heard of any of them before. And that's good for me because it really pushes me in my understanding of what's happening in the world. Because you hear a lot of the same people on some podcasts. And it's good to hear different voices that would never show up for me. So I think the ones that are just truly themselves and kind of know what it is they want to put out there are the ones that do well. And also, let's face it, it's not all about the numbers.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. So we can measure downloads and we can measure reach, to some extent, of like, oh, will this person status, like, will this person come on this podcast? And that's very much how I thought I would build at the beginning. It was very much like, I'll reach a certain level, and then I remember having a conversation with Layla Martin's assistant about my list size. This is about 8 years ago, to see, it can't have been that long, maybe 6, I don't know, however long ago, to see whether or not it was a fit. And her exact words were, we really love what you're doing, but you don't have enough listeners and it's not worth our time. And that's absolutely fine and absolutely acceptable. But it was a pivot point for me, because I then made a decision. I can either grow in that kind of way where I really focus on the numbers. And if you watch my whole journey, there was a point where I really went for sponsorship. I really was about the downloads and the growth and was doing a lot around that. And then at some point I was like, this is just not fun for me anymore.
Where's the love?
It needs to be fun.
Yeah, where's the love? Where's the attention? Where's the affection for what you're doing? I truly believe that when you're only focused on the numbers, and that's great, and yeah, more listeners is always good, but good quality listeners, loyal listeners, that's what you need. You need
And I've
people
got
who just
people who
love
listened right at
you.
the beginning of Adulting with Ebony, who found me from that podcast, who had no friends in common, no common anything. He found me from that podcast, who are still paying customers 6 years later.
There you go. And I know that some of my clients who have maybe, like, if you saw the download figures, you might say, oh, that's not that big, because people imagine you have to have tens of thousands of downloads to be a hit. And that's not true. You know, that happens for celebrities. You know, some like Made in Chelsea stars make a podcast, everyone's going to blooming listen. You know, it's a given. Stephen Bartlett, he's going to have loads of downloads. Good for him. True crime podcasts, loads of downloads. But for more niche businesses who have a really niche message to give, you don't need lots. You need loyal and loving listeners, and that you can love them back. And that's all you need.
Yeah, 100 raving fans. When I did my so in that transition, I did for a year, I did Alchemy with Ebony, or like an alchemy, priestess of alchemy type podcast. It was absolutely an experiment. And for the first, and I didn't want everyone listening to it, because I wanted to have it as a place to verbally process what was happening in my life. And it was a big transition. And so I put a £5 paywall on it, and I hadn't done that up until that point. And the cash that came through in that year from that podcast, there were times when that was the only money that was coming in to support me while I was in that hiatus. And it felt amazing to have people that were willing to do that, and that were willing. I mean, I'm sure they got a lot from listening to me as well.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
it is a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, I love it when podcasters have a Patreon option, because I don't feel like I should always just have their content for free. You know, I pay for at least 2 true crime podcasts, and one of those podcasts in the same network, I remember, was when I was pregnant with Thomas, so 5 years ago, being really poorly while I was pregnant. Just before I got my asthma diagnosis, I was really, really poorly. And I was lying on the couch every night because I couldn't sleep upstairs. It was too cold and affecting my chest. And I used to listen to their podcast until I could go to sleep. And that feels like family at that point. You know, these people are important, and they're actually American. And one of the hosts has got a new book out, and he's coming to London in August. And I bought tickets to go and see him, to hear him read a chapter of his book, because they're important to me, you know? And that's what you want. You want listeners who just think, oh, I couldn't be without you. Whatever you want to talk about.
I love that. And on that note, I'm going to wrap this portion of the podcast up, and we're going to go into the green room, into the side lounge, and do the last, I guess, except for me, because I will do a solo Sacrosanct Secrets episode. Before we do that, where can people find you? Where's the best place for them to come and hang out and get to know you and find out about how they can have you help them?
The best place to find me is on Instagram at Kelly Walsh Podcasting. And yeah, I hang out there and always happy to chat to people.
And I would normally say, and I'll put all the links below, but I won't. You will.
I'll put my links below.
Thanks. I have no idea what we're going to talk about in the other bit yet. Probably something to do with podcasting, and how to get started when you don't think you can do it, and you've got no money, and all the things, all the barriers to entry that you see.
Amazing. That I love to talk about.
And how to get over them. Right. So if you are in the Maven Haven, you can go listen to that. And if you aren't, £5 a month. Thanks.